What happens to men?
Having a little bit of a belly or, maybe not being as cardiovascularly fit because they're men, right? They're supposed to be smoking a cigar and, hanging out at the country club because that's a sign of success. When we talk about andropause, which is basically male menopause, it's not so defined for people.
Ben Esra Çavuşoğlu. 18 yıldır ayık bir hayat yaşıyorum. Bağımlılık hastalığıyla mücadelem, beni beden ve zihin performansımı iyileştirmek, hayat kalitemi arttırmak, daha sağlıklı ve uzun yaşamak için yeni yöntemler, cihazlar ve takviye ürünler araştırmaya yönlendirdi. Bağımlılık hastalığı, biohacking ve longevity alanlarındaki kendi deneyimlerimden dünyadaki son gelişmelere, çığır açan girişimcilerden uzman akademisyenlere, yıllardır yaptığım sohbetler artık her hafta Ayık Kafa podcast'te. So I have Jake Deutsch with me. He's a medical doctor. He's a medical ER doctor, correct?
Yeah, my training is actually emergency medicine.
And also he's a serious entrepreneur. He had multiple careers, I want to say, within the same profession. He started as an ER doctor as training and then created this very, very, very crucial chain clinics in New York who helped so many people before and during COVID. So he created the urgent care and he had multiple locations in New York. And after a successful sales of the brand, then he embarked into a new career, I would say. And it is the preventative medicine with Oakwood Medicine.
Oakwood Precision Medicine, that's correct.
So Jake, first part of your career started with taking action and taking care of emergency issues, whether a broken leg or at the tail end of a cancer, whatever it is. So it was just to fix the issue, in other words. Mm-hmm. Then you jumped in to prevent these diseases. I'm sure there's a thought process how you jumped from one to the other.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let me first begin by saying the one Turkish word that I looked up, merhaba.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to see the edited version where I'm actually speaking in Turkish. So this is all very exciting to me. But to answer your question, I started as an ER doctor. So I'm board certified in emergency medicine and did that for over 20 years, seeing people sort of at the, sort of the worst moment of their lives. They go to the ER for things like heart attack or a stroke. And, that really was my training, was to be specialized in taking care of those urgent, emergent conditions. And so after many years of doing that and then launching the urgent care practice, I had a very nice opportunity as an entrepreneur to sell that practice. And then I decided to start my current practice, which is really about prevention. So it's a totally opposite end of the spectrum. And I don't know if that was intentional or just, sort of how things ended up. But what I've been doing for myself, what I've been doing for my friends, really sort of optimizing health, working on prevention, what we're calling biohacking, was the foundation of creating this practice because I saw that there was a very big need for it. People were interested in learning about it, but didn't really know how to apply the practices. So I wanted to create something that was very bespoke, with a very high level of service and be able to achieve those objectives to, provide this direction of care. So it's been an incredible 4 years. We've had, great success. I have amazing clients in New York City, and it's been a great growth for my career, which, it's interesting as we do these things, where the path takes us. I would have never predicted necessarily that I had worn all these different hats when I was in med school, thinking I want to be a doctor. So it's a very exciting time within medicine with all of these developments. And I think that you're on to the correct concept of your podcast. You're sharing this information with people because everybody really wants to have that opportunity to have a better quality of life and better longevity as a goal.
Exactly. And if I'm not mistaken, at least at the very beginning, you had this very specific focus to help men to live their best selves.
Yeah.
I know that you added now women, it's 50-50, but you started like that and you practice what you preach. That's the most important. So they had a friend or a doctor that to look up to see how you look, how you are healthy, how you live your day. And I do know also that you are also in the advisory board of a couple of important biohacking technologies. So Why don't you start telling me why you started, at least had the idea of like, I want to help men?
Yeah, I think initially my thought was I wanted to just stay as focused as possible. I've learned in some of the different businesses that I've developed that having a very specific focus tends to lead to the greatest success. And I saw that there was a really big gap for men. Most men don't go to the doctors very often. They're kind of putting their health on the back burner. So I saw an opportunity to really focus on specifically, that gender as a group. What happened was, with great success on the men's side, I saw also a big request on the women's side. Some of them were their spouses. Also, we saw a very big change really in the direction of all of what we were doing with the advancement of GLP-1 medications, and people were really interested in medical weight loss management. So I saw that necessity to add to the practice. So yeah, now we're seeing about 50-50. There's sort of unique needs between each gender, which I've started to, understand better as we've gotten into, really focusing on what everybody is interested in.
Exactly. But today I want to be digging into men more. The reason is like most of the guests that I brought in, either they spoke genderless or was more like I don't want to say women focused, but precautions or practices that women can apply. And because you have a huge specialty on how to help men, I just don't want to miss this opportunity to also spread the correct information and message to our Turkish men. So let's start first, maybe how men and women metabolism are different and why the regimens shall be different.
Having a focus for men, for some degree, it's just about the process. So when, guys come to me, they are maybe a bit skeptical, or they, haven't really dealt with a doctor that they felt comfortable with, that they could relate to. And sort of touching on what you were talking about, I practice what I preach. And that's, I think, one of the key first steps is that, we have a connection with the patients that is very personal and it's something that they can relate to. And then men in general, I find, especially the very highly successful, highly motivated individuals that we tend to help, they kind of want it simplified. They don't want to have to think too much about what's next. They want to have a real clear roadmap. And so my goal is to be a health coach that makes those objectives very clear and has a delivery of providing that service. So, as an example, we make sure that when we see somebody, creating an evaluation that has a timeline. And in that timeline, we're giving specific recommendations for what needs to be achieved. And then by frequency of evaluation, it allows that to be reviewed and then have success. So we see our clients every 4 to 6 weeks, and that's why we call it a precision medicine. And that's really what guys, I think, respond to, is that they have this coach, this guidance that they've never experienced before. So that's really one of the key foundations. And then when it comes to the differences between, men and women, we have a completely different focus when it comes to body composition for men than it, typically with women. Guys want to be more muscular, more fit. They're looking at a different set of aesthetics necessarily than women. So being very knowledgeable in, how to achieve those goals, how to utilize different tools to achieve those goals. I think that that's also one of the factors that men respond well to. And then lastly, there's like a key core group of different health issues that men need to focus on, and that's prostate issues, colorectal issues, cardiovascular issues. So having specific tools in the toolbox that we're able to address those, makes it a unique experience for the men. And yeah, I think that the end of the day, when they see I'm doing exactly what I'm telling them to do, it really adds to a sense of confidence and allows for success, a different level of connection. I always say to people, you wouldn't go to a hairdresser that has bad hair. So, when they come to see me and they say, oh, how old are you? And they're maybe surprised, or they're like, oh, wow, I really want to get to that level of fitness. It allows there to be some confidence that, I'm not just saying do this, but I'm actually, practicing it as well.
I'm going to just give an odd example. Someone like, let's say, 60 years old, not enough muscle, a little belly, not really thinking clearly. I'm just giving you a persona, describing you a persona. Like, so they come and they say, hey, Dr. Deutsch, I want to look like you, or I want to feel like you. Walk me through what would be their journey with you.
Sure. I mean, when it comes to a profile like that, you're talking about a large majority of most guys. They've let it
That's why I was
slowly slide, right? And for men, there's an accepted normal of, having a little bit of a belly or, maybe not being as cardiovascularly fit because they're men, right? They're supposed to be smoking a cigar and, hanging out at the country club because that's a sign of success. But I think that the pendulum has changed and people are starting to understand success when it comes to your health is no different than success when it comes to your business practices. And that success looks like, being leaner, not having that belly fat, working on these biomarkers that we can understand are predictors of your overall health. And that really, I think, is a key concept that we put into practice when we evaluate people. And beyond that, I think that we need to make sure people understand that this slowing of the metabolism, essentially, what we're talking about, is a predictor of other bad problems, other diseases developing down the road. So, the concept of a dad bod, which we kind of joke about, where you have, a little bit of fluffiness in your midsection, we could actually take a look at that and say, well, this is a predictor for your risk for diabetes, your risk for developing heart disease, even risk for developing cancer. And so that then changes the perspective that these guys have after we go through a very deep assessment. And that includes hundreds of biomarkers. That includes body composition scans where we could actually measure the lean muscle mass and the fat, and then putting together that picture that is now a 180 on how they're looking at their overall health. And so that's really the shift that I'm seeing. And it's really exciting because now guys are looking at their health and, sort of using it as a marker of success and maybe even comparing with their friends. Whereas, in the past, it would be the opposite, like, let's hang out and, relax and, go on holiday. And now there's a really different perspective that people are focusing on.
Yeah, that's amazing how you are transforming them by just pinpointing on some serious health issue, looking to their belly or to their marker so that they're getting convinced of getting into that path and changing themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we see people that come in that are leaders in their industry in terms of their business life, but their medical assessment, their medical health is at the 20th percentile. They have, more body fat than most people in the same age group. And so we can take a look at where they fit in terms of like the overall population. And I'm like, this is a return on your investment. It doesn't make sense that you're not putting more effort into it and not, banking on that health, because if we don't have our health, we really don't have anything else dependent on. I mean, our health is really our biggest measure of success. And so having that information and serving as a advisor for people's health is really one of the key concepts that I like to address. I talk to guys all the time. They have a real estate advisor, a financial advisor. They have somebody that's helping them with their art. And I look at myself as a health advisor, and I think everybody should have that type of opportunity to work with somebody to advise them on their health. And I don't want guys to come in and tell them that they're fine. Most people go to the doctor once a year and they do their basic workup, and the doctor says, yeah, everything looks fine. But if your financial advisor told you your portfolio is fine, you would say, that's not really the outlook that I want to have. And so same concept when it comes to health. Like, I want people to be great. I want them to be optimized. So really that's what I'm focusing on. And it's a mindset that needs to shift a little bit in the general population. But then there's this, group of people who've already figured it out. And so those are really the exciting clients that come in and they've already started. And now I just get to, be an accelerant to help the process even more.
It's very interesting. I have a brother and I do have a brother-in-law. They're these men, like they have all these, like a little belly sometimes. They just intermittent fast. they think, but then they break the fast with nonsense stuff. But in
Yeah.
any way, whenever they go to a doctor and they see their biomarkers and the doctor, regular classical medicine, let's say, traditional medicine, they say, oh, everything is fine. Even me, I'm not an MD. When I look at it, I can say that, okay, you're going to be soon having diabetes or your thyroid is off, but up to the doctor, their annual checkup, let's say, they're like, oh, everything is okay, you can come next year. And I'm like, are you crazy? You need to pay more attention. With that said, I want to come to something that I heard you saying before. It's better to measure your biomarkers at an earlier age so we can have a baseline. Can you please explain that a little bit?
Such an important concept when it comes to health optimization is, what is normal and then what is optimal. And so when you get a report from a laboratory, you're going to have a range that's normal. And let's use, for example, hormones, right? So we have a normal range for testosterone, but it's very, very skewed in the fact that normal for people over 50 is one value. So it doesn't matter if you're 50 or you're 70, and the same thing for under 50. So when we start to look at those normal ranges, most providers are saying, well, you fall into that range, there's nothing that needs to be corrected. And in fact, when we're looking to optimize, we want to have a range that's more in the focus of where we were when we were optimal. When you were in your 20s and early 30s, when your testosterone was produced at higher levels, that's the optimal range that we're looking for. And that's going to probably fall above the limits that the lab puts for your biomarkers. That's a key concept that most doctors aren't dialed into. And so having that as the foundation is important. But then, having your numbers from when you were more towards your optimal age gives us an idea of what our goal is. So, in your 20s, having full panels, hormone panels, inflammatory panels, autoimmune panels, then we can take a look at it when we're in our 30s and 40s and 50s as a comparison and be very specific to what your optimal is and then try to work towards addressing that. But to be honest, most people don't ever get those initial panels when there's nothing wrong, quote unquote, because that's just not the standard of practice. And I think that we need to start to implement that to some degree. But that takes foresight. That takes, changing the conversation so that people are not only, when they're turning 50 saying, hey, I want to do this. I want to figure out what's failing me, but, starting at a much younger age. What I see more often than not is people come in and I'm like, what brought you in? What are the key things that you're trying to address? And it's always, well, I'm turning 50, I feel low energy. I just, things are not working like they used to. And that's great. I'm happy to help. But what if we, in our 20s, we're saying, hey, I want to feel like this for the next 50 years. What do I need to keep in check? What do I need to have an awareness of? What do I need to be ahead of when I get to those stages rather than let's figure it out when I get there? So it's a different concept.
As a woman who is in her menopause, and following a functional medicine approach, and all my doctors, including my OBGYN, is a functional medicine doctor. And, they keep saying for women, it's the first time I'm hearing for men, but for women saying like, if we know what your optimal level of hormones are, so it would be much easier and less dangerous to give you a hormone replacement therapy without fearing that it's too much, too low, whatever. So with that said, actually, we hear a lot about like women. They have their monthly cycle, then they got into their premenopause, menopause, constantly trying to figure out their hormones, and they're pregnant and they're not. What happens to men? Because we never hear what happens to men, and men never take it seriously, the changes.
Right. I mean, when you think about menopause, we're talking about the change in our hormone balance and essentially kind of a shutdown of our reproductive hormones, women's reproductive hormones, which are so essential to daily function. And that's why we get the very typical symptoms of hot flashes and, irritability and other, sexual dysfunction. And so that's very defined, right? Like in a sense of what society thinks about, that's very easy to grasp. But when it comes to the male counterpart, when we talk about andropause, which is basically male menopause, it's not so defined for people. The concept of low T is tossed around, but what does that actually mean? And if you don't understand what that is, kind of what those symptoms are, you may not understand why that's important for you to address. And so when I talk with guys, I'm always sort of emphasizing like testosterone is important for virility. It is the predominant male sex hormone. It makes us have a deep voice and facial hair, help build muscle. But we have receptors for this hormone in almost every cell of our body. So in our brain, it helps with cognition and sort of mental function. It helps with our mood. So oftentimes guys who are depressed, it could be related to low testosterone. We have receptors in our digestive system, so it helps with our metabolism and maybe some issues related to nutrition. So it goes much further than that typical, well, I'm not having good sex or I don't have strong erections. That's part of it. But there's a real sort of sense of wellness that also is attached to having that hormone optimized. And so when I assess people, I'm not only looking at those reference ranges and then optimal from a lab perspective, I'm also really digging into what's going on in their life. I see guys that are on antidepressants, that are on, medications to help with erectile dysfunction. They may, just be struggling with their weight. And these can be corrected by addressing the hormone issue. And that's the concept of functional medicine, is getting to the root cause, not just prescribing something that's going to reverse what's happening, but actually trying to fix what's causing the problem. And so that's a really big approach for men that we work on in just the same way as what you're talking about for women. And I think important to add to this is there needs to continue to be a shift in why this is not something that's negative. Nobody says, oh, this woman's on estrogen replacement, she's cheating, or she's taking a steroid. Taking testosterone replacement, replacing what your body naturally makes, again, is not cheating. It's not steroids. These are bioidentical hormones that our body is naturally making. So having an understanding of that concept and making sure people, understand that this is optimizing to what your body naturally does is really important. So that way we can see, more people feel comfortable with this process and the concept.
I have people around me that family members, they're going to hate me now, but family members, when they were warned that, young people, that they have in the lower side, I don't want to say low, but in the lower side testosterone, they just suddenly become very defensive. Oh, I have no problem with my sexual life. And the doctor, which I highly respect, says like, well, it does so many other things. All these symptoms that you're saying, you're agitated, you're tired, you have a cloudy thinking, you don't feel your best. These are all related. And sometimes also, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes one doesn't need only testosterone replacement, but their support with supplements also, they can get it to some levels. I'm not talking about after 50 maybe, but in the younger ages that one can...
benefit, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we come up with a treatment plan for people, there's obviously the foundation that we need to address too. And so some of these are just, mineral and vitamin deficiencies. Mm-hmm. Vitamin D is what our body uses for quite a bit of hormone synthesis. Similar with, some of the precursors that our body is in need of, like DHEA, in order to make our reproductive hormones. So these are not prescription medications. These are actually supplements that we can use. We can use herbal medications in order to help boost our natural production of testosterone, and even other herbs that I like to use regularly to reduce conversion of estrogen, because a lot of guys have actually high estrogen levels, and that's why they may have excess fat and sort of fluid retention or low libido. So we could actually address some of those naturally. Cholesterol is a great example too. So we could use supplements to help reduce cholesterol as a starting point. And then, assess if we need to use prescription medications in conjunction with that. So that's a really important point. And, these are simple corrections that, you don't need to have necessarily to spend a lot of money or have, a prescription for. So knowing your biomarkers, not only for hormones, but for all of the kind of big categories that we look at is important. And one thing that I always emphasize to, sort of the general public is you can actually, like in the States, you can order your own blood tests. There's companies that you could actually just go to and say, hey, I want to check out these panels and get that information, because you may not have a practitioner that feels like that's important, and you can drive the conversation. You can take the action yourself. And I think that having that power is the first step to, the overall process of improving your wellness.
That's super important, in my opinion. Jake, we spoke about general issues or health. I want to discuss a little bit about this very popular topic, the intermittent fasting, because up until I went to Las Vegas last December, I really didn't know. I had a chance to listen to Mindy Pelz live on the stage, and I'm like, there's a women type of fasting. And then I started digging in a little bit. And then I saw that it's a double-edged sword a little bit, because it's very helpful, but yet if it's not practiced in a very certain way, that one can lose muscle, they don't have enough protein. Help people understand how shall one do the intermittent fasting?
Well, I think the concept needs to be defined first, because most people don't really even know what it is.
Yeah.
They may have heard of it, but it doesn't necessarily have a clear definition. And so when I talk to people about intermittent fasting, I always try to explain, you're basically stimulating your metabolism. When we eat 3 meals a day, our body is used to having highs and lows of glucose, because we consume food that then stimulates the entire cascade of insulin and glucose. And that is, to some degree, why people's metabolism slows down. We are overeating, we have too high a concentration of carbohydrates and glucose in our system, and that causes a slowdown, essentially, that can ultimately lead to metabolic problems like diabetes. So the concept of fasting is depriving your body of those frequent feedings and making it sense that there's a starvation happening. And then the body, in a sense, to starve, says, I need to work harder. I need to turn my metabolism up. The end result, when it's used correctly, is a stimulation of the metabolism that could be beneficial, because especially if you've eaten 3 meals a day for your entire life and there hasn't been great choices, your metabolism is definitely not functioning where it needs to. So you're able to push it, stimulate it, have a reset, if you will. And that's great. And I think the concept that we have to understand is the very definition of the very name, intermittent, right? So this isn't necessarily something to do every day. And it's really not a one-size-fits-all prescription. So when I work with clients and we're talking about using this as a tool, oftentimes we will modify it based on what their needs are. And for men, a lot of times we're really trying to maintain lean muscle mass and or build it. It's very difficult to get the nutrition that you need if you're skipping meals or not eating for 16 hours out of the day. That puts a small window when you need to consume what you have to have for the day. And if we're talking about protein content, particularly, we're looking at lean muscle mass as a predictor of overall longevity and keeping that muscle mass, then achieving that with the consumption of the correct amount of protein is almost impossible if you're doing it in one meal. I kind of tend to have people focused on carb cycling more than intermittent fasting. So, go through periods where you maybe restrict the carbs for a longer period of time, and then, you move them into your diet when you need them after workouts and such, versus strict intermittent fasting, especially if we're worried about maintaining that lean muscle mass. And here's the important general concept. When we're trying to maintain muscle mass, we want to have about 3/4 of our body weight in protein consumption. So I'm going to say this in grams, so I hope this converts. But, basically, if you're 100 pounds, let's say, we want to have about 75 grams of protein a day in order to maintain. And if we were trying to build muscle and you're 100 pounds, you want to have 100 grams of protein a day. That's a lot. So, if a guy's 200 pounds, we're talking about 200 grams of protein. How do you get that in when you don't have breakfast, for instance, and you're, first eating at 4:00 in the afternoon? So, that's the caveat about intermittent fasting that I think people need to be aware of. And, if you're going to attempt to do it, figure out where your calories need to come from and how you can get that nutrition. And that's why I love using CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, because it really tells you more about what's happening on a minute by minute basis to your metabolism than just assuming I don't need to eat for this 16 hours. That's what's going to be more favorable, because I can predict that you're doing better metabolically if your blood sugars are more level versus having high spikes and really over consuming it one meal a day. So that's the difference between those two approaches.
You're absolutely right. But there are going to be still people who are insisting that, no, I love this. I want to live longer. I heard somewhere, which actually nowadays there are research studies that are showing if you don't do it in your 20s or 30s, starting after 50 to an intermittent fasting has no added value to longevity, period.
Yeah, because there's this argument that you're causing strain on your body. And that strain isn't having a positive effect, but it's having the negative effect. So you're having increased inflammatory markers, you're having cortisol dysfunction, and that dysregulates all of the endocrine pathways when we have a disruption of that important hormone for stress. So, I think that that's a very good argument. And I also advise that, this is not a one size fits all. It's like just saying, all right, if you needed to have your hormones replaced, this is the dose that you need. Everybody is going to have a different dose, a different frequency. We need to monitor that for every individual. And so nutrition is part of that. And most people have never worked with a dietitian, nutritionist. It's very interesting that, we have very little education when it comes to this concept. And, people go to the gym every day, or they, talk about eating better, but they don't focus on the diet and nutrition with that same determination that they talk about their workouts with. And I think that, that needs to be a different approach for most people. Some people have done quite well for themselves because they figured it out and they have, good genetics, but most people need to have some sort of information that's going to help them. I see so many guys having fast food, or they're, eating prepared meals, and it just doesn't make sense when we can work on ways to improve that with a very simple fix, having, good quality foods and prepping meals and working with, services that help prepare the right types of foods. But oftentimes people don't know what to do. Having that coaching is really important.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. I see many people, not all the people, but quite a lot of people, when they break their fast, they suddenly jump into this, I don't want to say unhealthy, because, the rice and lentils and whatnot may not be unhealthy, but they start in a way that, they break that fast with a huge meal and not with protein at times. So what do you think? If people even let's say, okay, I'm going to do intermittent fasting, what do you suggest to break that fast with?
Well, I think that you got to be strategic about how you're going to get the right amount of nutrients in. You have to know what your goals are, and then, have a plan that's based on really numbers. To just say, all right, well, now I'm going to go eat. You're probably going to be far away from what the mark needs to be. But if you're putting the training as part of a part of your plan, you really don't need to be withstanding for that long. But if this is something that you say, absolutely, I'm going to stick to, then I would certainly make sure that you've done a metabolic workup and understand what your calorie consumption is, what your body needs, and then be counting macros to some degree, and then, the total protein count, and make sure that you're getting it in there, because you're probably not doing that. So, if you could have access to somebody from a real nutritional counseling perspective and get that information, that's probably a better approach than just figuring it out by luck.
I'm very, very curious about this topic because it's a hype in the US, not yet in Turkey. I'm sure that people are bringing in somehow. But this Ozempic, Mounjaro, similar peptides, and I'm sure people are coming to you as well as wanted to do these things. So what's your thought about these new, let's say, weight loss? It's probably for diabetes, I guess, but people are using.
Well, let me just give a little bit of a primer on what these medications are. Yeah, so we're talking about a category of medications that are called GLP-1s, glucagon-like peptides. And so basically these are mimicking a hormone that our body naturally produces in order to change the metabolism. So what it does is, instead of our body needing to eat, the body then is once it has this hormone, says, I want to use the stored fats. And so we naturally do this. When we're in a state of starvation, talking about intermittent fasting, our body makes this peptide naturally, and it says, all right, there's not any nutrition coming in, so let me take the stored fat. But what we're doing and what was determined is that we could use a medication to stimulate the same effect and then change the metabolism into a state where it's burning more fat. And that's more like when we were optimized in our 20s, right? When you're in your 20s, you can eat whatever you want to. You don't gain weight. It's because you're not only consuming food, but the body has got a different focus of metabolism. And it's when it needs more energy, it's just going to take that stored energy. That's the concept of what these medications do. They were developed for diabetics because this was sort of what was making people's diabetes worse, is having a slower metabolism and then having some of the other side effects of insulin insensitivity and excess glucose in the blood sugar. So while these were originally developed for diabetics, what we found is there was this associated weight loss with it because we saw this metabolic shift. And so that's where people have started to lean into them for body composition and helping lose weight because of that added benefit. But the interesting part of this story is they're not only effective for that weight loss, but we're seeing improvement in overall health outcomes, reducing risk of diabetes, and sometimes even reversing people's diabetes, lowering cholesterol levels, reducing our risk for cardiovascular disease, reducing risk for neurovascular diseases like stroke, and then even interesting findings that I'm seeing with patients that we're studying more, improving issues like PCOS, so ovarian issues, addiction issues. So there's some neurocognitive pathways which are being activated. And we're seeing that people, for instance, don't have cravings as much. They may not be binge eating. They may not be drinking as much alcohol. So when you look at this as a collective group of benefits, it's pretty incredible what we're talking about. If we could use one therapy to reduce people's blood pressure, to wean them off blood pressure medication, reduce their risk for diabetes, to help them lose weight. That's a really big win when we're talking about overall health. And so the issue is that these medications traditionally are, if they're not for diabetics, being prescribed, quote, off-label. They're not FDA approved. Several of them have now in the US become FDA approved for weight loss. But because they weren't necessarily available and because there was a high price tag associated with it, there was a very sort of, I would say, heated discussion about them because, this is sort of about who can have it and who can't, not necessarily on medical necessity. And so that's shifting, now that we're starting to see that there's approval for people using these as weight loss medications as well, and they're being covered by insurance, people are sort of a little less critical of them, and we're seeing really amazing results. I predict in the next 10 years, these medications are going to be just as commonplace as using a statin to help people lower their cholesterol. And, you don't say to somebody, oh, you're cheating because you're taking a statin. You may have a genetic issue where your body just makes too much cholesterol, no matter how well you diet and how much you exercise. That's not going to go down into what's a healthy range. And so you take that prescription medication.
Do you need to be obese? Because people sometimes has like these couple of kilos, which let's say 10 pounds or 8 pounds more than they want to be. I'm not talking about anorexic, but like they somehow, like they're getting older, they have menopause, or if they're men, they're passing 50. So are you against these people who has only a couple of pounds to use it to have a kickstart?
Yeah, when we talk about weight, there's obviously the obese category where we need to correct, right? Mm-hmm. But we need to understand the process of obesity is a spectrum where we have sort of insulin resistance and slow weight gain all the way up to the obesity. So many people have a metabolic slowdown, which really will benefit from using these medications. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 20 kilograms. It could be 5 kilograms overweight, and it's focused in their belly with visceral fat. And that has a high association with, developing diseases that we had talked about. Additionally, when we start to look at biomarkers and we see that an A1C is creeping up into the diabetic or pre-diabetic range, using these medications to reverse that is changing their metabolism. So I think there has to be a shift about like your not qualified because you have a certain weight. It's really about what's happening with your metabolism. And we look at the metabolism as a whole and how we can optimize that. And some people make an argument that when we gain weight, the body starts to get protective of that. So you could have 10 kilos of excess weight and you've had that for 20 years and your body starts to sense that as normal. And when we start to use GLP-1s, this helps people break that cycle. The body tends to hold on to that weight every time they try to diet because that's what their normal has become. So some of the neural pathways that are interrupted with using GLP-1s actually help people break that cycle. And in a situation like that, it might be something that's used to initiate the improvement of metabolism and used in combination with changes in lifestyle and diet modification and activity, and then having a greater level of success, which reduces all of those potential causes of harm that we're talking about.
Obviously, I never shared it in the programs, but this program became my the confession place. I have menopause, I have this, but I'm trying to really help people. I've been through that. It's interesting with this premenopause and menopause. I did put on this 4 or 5 kilos, which is equal to maybe 4 kilos would be 8, around 9 pounds.
2.2, yeah.
I mean, I tried so many things. I tried juice fasting. I tried whatever. But the food that I was intaking was the same. The workout that I was doing the same. And something was shifting in my body. And then finally, I was in New York last summer and I heard Mounjaro. And I said, let me try. Maybe that's going to break the cycle. And exactly how you explained, in 1 month, things shifted. And then I slowly after every 2 weeks, then I'm obviously off because I don't have that much weight. But I was able to get rid of these stubborn, strange, cellulite meeting fat that it was really nerve-wracking for me.
Yeah. And, I think that another really important concept to understand is when we're utilizing these medications, it's not a one-size-fits-all prescription. And the key to success that we're seeing is people keep it off when they change their behavior, when they've incorporated the diet and exercise. So, that is an important point because just prescribing the medications and then not working with patients to improve those other aspects is a setup for failure and they'll gain the weight back. And when I'm monitoring people, the other part of this is we have to understand your body composition. So when I'm prescribing GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, I want to see not just what the scale looks like, but what body composition is, because the scale only tells us your absolute weight, but it doesn't tell me what is the proportion of lean muscle mass and what is the proportion of fat. And using body composition analysis, when somebody comes in and they lost 10 pounds, I can see, all right, you've lost 8 pounds of fat and 2 pounds of lean muscle. That's a good proportion that we want to see, not 10 pounds of lean muscle and 0 pounds of fat. And that's where many people get into trouble, is using these medications. They end up looking gaunt or they have fat loss in their face versus having a targeted approach.
Yeah, before I started, I made a good dig in and I listened to a lot of podcasts. I mean, I ate enough protein. I did my workout. So I just was changing my way of approaching. Actually, the turnout was amazing. Jake, I want to get to the end, but I want to ask you something because I know that you have your own application and multiple ways of getting data from your clients. And that's the success of yours. Can you please give me that wonderful world that you have?
Yeah, so we created an app for clients and it basically serves as a health dashboard. So all of the data that comes in is on this dashboard, which they can view, but also we can view. And so if you're not using technology as part of your health optimization, you're really in the dark ages. We have so much more information about our activity, our sleep, our heart rate, things that are predictors of our wellness that data can collect and we can use as tools. And so in our application, this data all comes in and I'm able to look at it every day for clients. And then I do an analysis weekly and basically put together a report card for them that, I can then check in and see how they're doing. My check-in with clients every week is, how are you feeling? What's going on? I can see that your data looks very good or otherwise. And then we can have a conversation, not just how you're feeling. There's real science and numbers that are involved. For people that don't have access to a practitioner, you can be your own advocate here. Things like Oura Ring, Apple Watch, Whoop, Garmin, you could collect that data and start to learn what's happening to your body. And that's really what biohacking is changing your behavior to change your biology. And so if you learn that if you go to bed earlier, you sleep better, or you work out in the morning versus nighttime, you have more calories burned by this data collection, then you can change your behavior, and that can actually change your health. And so that's what we're talking about. So it's a really good plan for success for my clients. They feel like there's something tangible. We're not just talking about like, oh, your biomarkers look good, but we could actually look at something on a day-to-day basis and see changes and make, real comments and decisions based on that information. So I'm obsessed with it. Like you said, I'm an advisor for several companies that are in the health technology space because I think it's, part of the future. So figure out what that one device is that you can start with. Start getting that data, and then you're going to start to see the process happen because that's where people spark their interest.
With that application, I assume that you can also have clients from different countries abroad, overseas.
I do have some people that live in Europe and other states. That allows us to collect that, obviously. My goal is to create a concept like this that can be developed for everybody. So, that's like my next business plan is to figure out how we can make this accessible for everybody. And then, maybe if your doctor is not so inclined into this process, you could be the advocate. You could be, pushing to get the data, the labs, the, changes that you can then show to your doctor and just have them, kind of give you the coaching after you've been the advocate. So I think that's pretty exciting to look forward to.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely spread the words around because, I have many Turkish friends who lives in New York or lives in Turkey that also have a residency in New York that they can come and visit because I'm sure that, at least I know from people around me, they're in desperate need for good longevity doctors. Thank you, Jake. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Esra.
And hopefully I'll see you soon in New York.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest if your listeners want to follow on social, on Instagram at Dr. Jake Deutsch, we do a lot of, very succinct videos that hopefully cover information that can be informative and useful. So, check it out if you're on that social platform.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.